What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 481. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line back home from his 10th Mythic Championship / Pro Tour top 8, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, congratulations, man. It's just unbelievable. Another top 8 and number 10 for you. Incredible.
Yeah, it feels pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I remember at some point someone asked, like, did you even care anymore? I'm like, hell yeah, I care.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I remember that story. I think I told it maybe on here or on something. And it was like when you were playing in the last Pro Tour and you were playing and winning in for top 8. And what you were playing against? Oh, what's his name? Who did you play late in the rounds? Oh, the guy that wears the Andrew Luck jersey. Tell me his name.
Yeah, Burnett.
Yeah, Michael Burnett. And I think he said, like, jokingly, he's like, "Are you nervous?" And you were like, "Yes." And it was like, because there was so much on the line, and obviously you weren't like shaking or, whatever, but like, yes, of course I am. Like, this is a potentially another career moment for me. And you understand how important those were. It always amazes me when people, I think that they see your persona outward and they think that you're just so, happy-go-lucky, fun, kind of joking around guy. But it's like, dude, you care about this stuff a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. And every tournament like matters a lot to me. And it also is cool because, you mentioned when we were talking that last week on the show, or I said, yeah, I feel pretty prepared for this tournament. This we were recording on Thursday night. And I made a joke how I was just going to go 1-2 or whatever. But I did feel prepared for this tournament, and it feels good to have that be rewarded, even though I know how Magic works well enough to know that I could be the most prepared I ever was, be the best player in the universe, and still do badly in the tournament. It does feel good to put a lot of time into it and feel, really dialed in and feel like that gets paid off. Like I led our team's limited meeting because I really felt like I understood the format, which is not always the case.
Yeah, totally. And of course that translates to our listeners as well, because in many ways, listening to the show every week is a time, to hang out with us and be with us and all that. But also, it's work, right? It's like they're putting in work on their game and they're trying to improve themselves as much as they can. And there's a real translation there where it does work that way. It's this simple, almost like cliched, translate or, equation of putting in the work and then getting the results, but it really does. And I'm sure, Luis, you've had different levels of that over your career where there were times where there were other things that you couldn't test for or whatever, and you know the difference when you walk in there kind of going, well, I kind of know what's going on, and just hoping it all works out versus the confidence that you have.
Yeah,
like when you had on
and I've won when I felt not as prepared, and I've lost when I felt very prepared. But it is nice when it lines up such that it feels like hard work gets rewarded. So, luck being on your side always feels pretty good too.
Yeah. Well, anyway, congratulations, man. I couldn't be prouder of you. And it's one of my favorite moments of my career is when I get to announce you in the top 8, because I do the announcement, on the stream. And it's just like, I look down at your name and I'm just like, he's back here again. It always carries weight for me. I never just go, oh yeah, whatever, Luis got another top 8. What else is new? I always look at it and just go, how does he keep getting away with it?
He can't keep getting away with it.
So this week on the show, we're going to be doing our Q&A episode for this segment. So we're going to be answering questions from our patrons. This show is brought to you by channelfireball.com, the place to go for all things Magic related on ye old internet. You can find everything you need on CFB. And there's a bunch of extra stuff. You can sell your cards back to them. You'll get 30% back if you trade them in for store credit. If you spend more than $100 and you live within the United States, you can get free shipping on your order. That's pretty great. Then, of course, you're going to find all the sealed product, singles, and supplies that you might need. And while you're there, awesome free content right on the front of the website there from some of the best players in the world. It's really your one-stop shop for everything Magic related. Channelfireball.com. Also, make sure you tune in this weekend. We're going to be broadcasting the Grand Prix from Los Angeles. The format is modern, and people can that's on twitch.tv/.
Twitch.tv/Channel Fireball. So I'm really excited about the Grand Prix. Like, this is, you don't catch me in the booth as often as you used to. And this is an opportunity for me to get back and, prove I still know what's happening in Modern.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be working with Riley Knight. That'll be a lot of fun. I think of the two booths, it's me and Riley, and then you and Huey, William Jensen. Yours might be a little more restrained. So we'll see how that
the nonsense factor probably will skew in your direction.
The other thing is that I'm really excited about is just the whole team, at Channel Fireball. We've been working on ways to make coverage a lot of fun. Like we're going to be broadcasting the top 8 of the Pauper Mythic Qualifier. So it's the biggest or most high stakes Pauper event there ever has been, as far as I know, because the winner gets the Mythic Championship, and we're going to broadcast the top 8 of that. And I'm really looking forward to it. I play a lot of Pauper, even if I haven't the last couple months, and getting to do commentary of high stakes Pauper is going to be really sweet. Even if you haven't played it out, actually check it out. So that's going to be on Sunday morning, and I think it'll be really cool.
Yeah, that's great. So make sure you tune into that this weekend. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. You can sign up at patreon.com/limited resources. And one of the benefits that you get is you get to ask us questions. We go to our most dedicated listeners for inspiration and ideas on the show. And one of the great things about Patreon, and ever since we've been on Patreon, is this connection that you can create with your listener base directly, where I can go to the people that care the most and are most involved with the show and ask for questions. And it is so awesome to be able to relate so closely with your listener base, where if you don't, it becomes such a mess to try to throw this out into the world and on Twitter or somewhere like that. And here, it's just good, awesome questions from some of our best listeners. So if you want to be involved with that, that's where you can do it. We've got a playmat here. This one's going to go to, I should say what's on it. It's from Grand Prix Nashville, and it has some type of Obzon-looking attacking guy. I don't remember what card that is.
Oh, yes.
But
Obzon-looking attacking guy, the classic.
Yeah, that's the one. In fact, let's put that on. Obzon. And what is that? Nashville. Or Nashville, as they say. Brian Yin from Long Island City, New York. Thank you, Brian, for your support of the show. I will be sending this one to you. And we've got, of course, a Crack-a-Pack, and it is one of these special Crack-a-Packs with a special Planeswalker in it. And we'll be giving this one away. I'll say who that's going to go to in just a moment. Let's get this thing open, though. All right, first card is Persistent Petitioners. No. Scorchmark. Sure, I guess it's better than Persistent Petitioners. Bring to Trial.
No, I'd rather start with Scorchmark than Bring to Trial.
Yeah, me too. I haven't... I rarely
want like one Scorchmark in my main deck and 0.5 Bring to Trials. So
yeah, that is correct. Rakdos Roustabout, 1 black-red for the 3/2. Whenever it gets blocked, it pings the opponent.
Filler,
exactly. Sylvan Breaststrider, also filler. All right, we've got a winner. Skewer the Critics, the better Scorchmark, 2 and a red, 2/3 damage to anything spectacle for red.
Like we've talked about the top commons of each color and the top commons overall. Skewers on both those lists. So fine card to start with. Good.
Card that you like quite a bit, and I do too. Blade Brand, 1 in a black instant, gives a creature death touch and you draw a card.
Skewer, though.
Yes, agreed. Titanic Brawl, fine, 1 in a green instant. Target creature you control fights a creature you don't control, and if the creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, then Titanic Brawl only costs green.
I thought it's okay. Like, it's good in some Gruul decks and some Simic decks that have higher power toughness creatures in general, especially if it's because of Riot or Adapt. But I found you can almost always get 1 or 2 Titanic Brawls, and often you don't want them.
Yes, that does end up being the case. Savage Smash. Is that what it's called? Savage whatever, of course, being a much better version. Growth Spiral is not a card we're going to be taking here. All right, uncommons. Ooh, nice one. Rakdos Firewheeler. Black, red for a 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, it does 2 damage to an opponent and 2 damage to a creature or planeswalker.
I think I would start with Skewer over Firewheeler here. Same. Just because Skewer goes in both Rakdos and Gruul, and potentially something like Teamer where you can splash it. Whereas Rakdos Firewheeler goes well in exactly Rakdos. And a lot of the time, you're just going to have to abandon this card. If it was, 3 times as good as Skewer, sure, I would take it. But it's only like 1.5 times as good as Skewer, and I would rather take Skewer in that spot.
This card is not as good as either. It's Eyes Everywhere, 2 and a blue. That's enchantment that being to upkeep. Sky 1, 5 and a blue to exchange control of it and target non-land permanent at sorcery speed.
Yeah, that card's not playable as far as I can tell.
Yep. Bloodmist Infiltrator, 2 and a black, 3/1. Whenever it attacks, you can sacrifice another creature. If you do, it's unblockable until end of turn. Fine card, but I feel like people pick this card higher than I do because I rarely end up with it. But it is okay. The ability to put creatures in your graveyard can actually be kind of good. There's a lot of ways to get them back, and then also sometimes they get locked up under things like there's a bunch of enchantments in white and blue that'll lock it down, like Slimebind and Sky Tether, and of course Lawmage's Binding.
Yeah, it's just a filler card. I do think sometimes it fits into like an Active Treason red-black deck, but I don't think that's an archetype you can go for. It's just the sort of deck where, like, I played an Active Treason at the Mythic Championship because I had a Priest of Forgotten Gods in my deck.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
And when you have that, Active Treason becomes a lot more powerful. Same with Bloodmist Infiltrator.
Yeah. Rakdos Guildgate is our Guildgate, and our rare is Pestilent Spirit. 2 and a black, 3/2 with Menace and Death Touch. Instant and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. As we talked about with this card, the baseline stats are actually quite strong. A 3/2 Menace Death Touch is a real problem to deal with, and if you end up being in Rakdos, that extra text can be quite good. Otherwise, it doesn't really apply if you end up playing it in Orzhov, which exactly. Summary Judgment is one of the ways, but Final Payment and stuff doesn't apply. But it's still totally fine in Orzhov as well. I would take it actually out of this pack. I have it a little higher than
I agree. It's very frequently, this is just like a 3-mana removal spell where it just trades for whatever their best creature is on the ground on defense. Totally fine. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a position to be attacking with it, they get to trade, if they're lucky, their 2 worst creatures. And if they're unlucky and you have a combat trick, it gets a lot worse for them. So it's a good card to start with. I would take Pestilent Spirit. I actually started one of the drafts with it.
Nice. Yeah. And the upside is high. I mean, Scorchmark, maybe we wheel a Scorchmark or whatever. Yeah, totally. It really does do work in that way too. And those
Gates of Blaze, I actually haven't pulled that one off.
Okay, that's dumb. But Gates of Blaze always kills everything anyway. Right? All right, and our special Planeswalker, dear God, this is sick looking. Tameo the Moon Sage.
I think I would take Tameo over Pestilent Spirit.
Yeah, come on, that's not a pick in a thing. That is going to go to Nate Brunette from Bloomington, Minnesota. Nate, you lucky dog. This thing is going to go into somebody's cube or whatever deck because that just looks insane. Thank you, Nate, for your support, and we do appreciate it. Let's get into the questions. First one comes from Ed Malone, who says, "Hey, if you had to say which Magic card the other host reminds you of the most, which card would it be and why?"
Gluttonous Zombie.
I have one too, but I can't remember the name of it. It has the word Maw in it.
Maw of Obsidat?
No, let me look. I think it's Maw of the Obsidat. Yeah, the one that's like just being like chain, like there's like a assembly line of food being given to it. That is the one. How did you know that? Oh, that is great. Yeah. How about Into the Maw of Hell?
Well, that's us before we start recording.
Atticus says, love the show. Thanks for everything. Been listening since Brian Wong's first episode. Wow, you're old school, Atticus. Nice. My question is about basic land power rankings. I can't justify the expense of beta basics, and I can't blame you for that, by the way, Atticus. Those things have gotten absurdly expensive. But I recently got a colleague's old collection that includes a ton of Ice Age basics that I find quite beautiful. Good enough, or do I still bring shame to my family? I formerly used original Zen full arts.
This is a perfect question because I get to address a misconception that I hear a lot. Mm-hmm. I care a lot about the lands I use. That comes through, right? You get to watch me from the booth and listen as I talk about these things, and you can tell I put a lot of thought into what versions of cards and lands I play with.
Yeah.
I played with like the 1996 Arena ones. This time I play with beta lands frequently, etc. Mm-hmm. I don't care what other people play with. And in fact, I don't think you really should care or give other people any grief about what they do want to play with. Like, I make fun of, Paulo or Raptor because they just go to the land station and grab a bunch of lands right before the event starts for their constructed deck. But if that's what they want to do, I think they should just do whatever makes them feel good. I think, Atticus, if you think your Ice Age lands look good, and which, by the way, I agree, I think they look great, use them. You use whatever lands you think not only will make you feel good, but will also let you focus on the game. Because, people were joking with me because before the tournament started, I was like trying to get invasion ops from CFB.
And your shocks and stuff, I remember.
Right. And they're like, why are you wasting time on this? This is stupid. And okay, maybe they're right. But honestly, for me, it actually makes me feel better to have the versions of the cards I want to have. And once I have that, I don't worry as much about that. And I move on to just focusing on the tournament. And maybe that's foolish, but it is the sort of thing that, you know, it makes me happier. And I think that's plenty good enough. So I think that you should play with whatever version of card makes you happy, and doesn't matter. Like, it's not based on cost. Like, I don't think the arena lands I used last tournament at the Pro Tour were expensive. I have no idea. I've just had them forever. I just think they look good. And because they look good, I decided to play them. Yeah. And that's basically where it starts and stops.
Yeah, for me, I like it when people choose whatever they think is their favorites. Like, I don't like when people just go to the land box. I'm like, come on, like, this is an opportunity for you to show the world what you think is cool or what you think is good, especially for people that play on camera. And I think that's just fun to do that. Now, if you don't care about it, well, then, you know, fair enough. But yeah, I think that where Atticus is going here is actually becoming the new norm for people that are into this type of stuff, because Atticus is right. I mean, the beta basics are now absurd. I mean, I picked up mine a long time ago when they were like $3 or $4. Now they're like $20. It's like, well,
I got mine for $1 each,
yeah,
and I was like short a couple because I just brought a picture I didn't want to use at one of the Pro Tours earlier this year, and I bought them from a dealer, and they were like $15 each. I'm like, wow, that's nonsense. I probably shouldn't do this.
Right.
Like I did. But
yeah, and also they are like actually a fairly sound investment. I mean, I think that, you know,
yeah, I mean,
you know, as far as, I mean, maybe not.
I think that if that's a way to justify it for you, then that totally makes sense.
It is for me. Then again, I got mine for $4. But anyway, I have seen a lot of people taking old lands, very specific art old lands that are not like that. They're not, you know, they're 10 cents or whatever.
At the end of the day, the art and the pictures matter. I mean, this is part of the reason that Magic is such a cool game. So if I happen to like a particular version of a card, I'll try and find that card and play that card because I think it's cool.
Yeah,
so
I do the same. Chase says, Marshall, is it difficult for you to remain unbiased when you cover LSV on the Pro Tour or Mythic Championship? That's a great question, Chase, because this is something that I have to deal with not just Luis, but a lot of people who I care about and consider friends as they play. And then I also have to deal with this from the perspective of the audience, because it gets really interesting. Like, we could use Reed Duke as an example. And let's just be honest. If Reed Duke is playing against somebody that the audience hasn't heard of, let's say a newcomer to the Pro Tour stage, you know, the audience is going to be rooting for Reed because they like him. And that goes for Luis and a lot of other people too. And I want to reflect what the audience feels, at least to some point, but not too far, right? Because I have to also recognize that the person sitting across from Luis or Reed or whoever it is, you know, this is their moment as well, and this is a big deal. And I think a great example of this, and I'm proud of the way that I hold myself. I consider myself a professional, and it's really important for me to be professional when I'm doing this stuff. And that means I don't think that means completely unbiased. Like, everybody knows, or many people watching know, that Luis and I are close friends and that we do the show together and stuff. So I'm not going to try to pretend like that's not the case. But there's no way I ever want to be like rooting for one player or the other in the feature match, and I don't. And a great example of this is if you go back and look at the finals of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica, right? Luis is in game 5, and he suffers just the most soul-crushing mulligan to 4 I've ever seen on camera. I mean, this is just like the worst-case scenario. But if you listen to me, I get very, very excited for Andrew Ellenbogen, and I make sure to show that enthusiasm for him and not get, have the moment be, well, it looks like Andrew's going to win, not for Luis this time, right? I really try to show my enthusiasm for him because what a moment. I mean, this is, his first real big success at this level. And he had to get by Luis to do it, which is a monumental task in and of itself. And yes, he had to get a little lucky at the end, to win that game so easily. But so what? Like, Luis would have taken that too. So, I do pride myself on it. And yes, it is a little difficult though. I do have to make sure that I kind of keep myself in check for the people that I really root for. And of course, Luis is one of them. I did mention it earlier, but one of the times when I really kind of get to let go of that though is when I announce at the top 8 announcement. And that's just, I love that. I remember, getting to
I like the top 8 announcement. That's what I'm in them also.
Yes, yeah. Yes. You agree with that. Yeah. I remember getting to announce Calcano, and that was a great moment. And just, I've had a whole bunch of them like that, but Luis's are always really near the top of my list. how does he keep getting away with this? Chris Norton says, I started playing MTG just over a year ago and mainly play with my kids or on MTG or Arena. I want to play more at my local game store, but I get nervous because I'm 30 years old and just getting into it when everyone else has so much more experience. How do I get over the anxiety I have about playing with people I don't know and that are more experienced? And this is, boy, I can relate to this in a big way, Chris, because when I came back to the game, I think I was about 30, maybe 31. I can't remember. What year is it? 11? Yeah, I was 30. I was 30 years old. I was the same age as you, Chris, when I came back and started playing a lot more. And I had the exact same experience. I actually began by playing on Magic Online under Ryan's tutelage. He said, this is where you're going to want to end up being anyway, because I know you're going to want to be drafting. And I did. But then there was a local game store and I showed up and oh my God, it was intimidating. They weren't particularly nice. I did not know the lingo at the level that they did. I did not know the rules interactions at the level that they did. And there was all these inside jokes and all these things that they were talking about, just as people that were way more into this thing than I was at this time. And boy, I felt the same way. I felt exactly how Chris did. What ended up happening for me was I just kept going back, even though it was kind of uncomfortable. But I really just wanted to play. And also I kind of tapped in a bit to my competitive spirit. Like I wanted to beat these guys. You know, I wanted to be like, yeah, I'm learning, I'm picking this stuff up. And I wanted to kind of overcome that. And what actually ended up happening on the shop was over the course of a long period of time, you know, these shops have turnover. And a lot of those calling them toxic is too strong, but just unwelcoming players, right? They just weren't very nice. They actually ended up kind of filtering out. And if you fast forwarded like a year and a half or 2 years after that, I kind of was the loudest voice in that shop.
You were the toxic and welcoming player.
But I was welcoming, like, and I would actually call out people, especially the younger people at the shop, who thought it would be funny to make fun of somebody. You know, they're in high school or just out of high school and they're just immature or whatever. And I would say, hey, you know, like, don't do that. Like this person can play with us too, even if what they said was wrong or even if they don't play as well as you do or whatever. And, you know, you set that tone, you get somebody that's a little more of a outward personality, which I can be once I get used to people. And then, you know, you can kind of feel the dynamic of a shop change. But if you have a shop that's, you know, feeling a little hostile, or if you're just feeling nervous about it, I don't know. I mean, I had to just keep going. Like it did not just fix itself for me. I had to just literally keep going and use my motivation of being kind of a competitive person to do it. Do you have any ideas on that, Luis? I mean, it's kind of a personal thing, right?
Yeah, I think that one thing to keep in mind is if someone makes you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, that's a dog.
Please say that's a dog. Yeah.
The dog will alternate between running. Oh yeah, you can hear it, can't you?
Yeah. What is Julie doing?
She will race downstairs and then roll on the floor a bunch and then race all the way upstairs. She is just going nuts.
She knows you're recording and she wants to be on the show, obviously.
Yeah, apparently. But yeah, she is just. And then she can go out in the backyard and it's snowy out there, so she's like drenched now because she got snow and then it melted on her. And anyway,
snap trade lies with dog, by the way. But
the dog just has it great. Yeah. Basically, if someone makes you feel like unwelcome, in a lot of ways, like they are the problem, not you. Like there's no bar you have to meet to get to play Magic. Like you can know nothing about Magic and you should still be welcome playing Magic.
Totally.
So don't feel like you have to meet up to a particular standard in order to play, even though I know it sucks and some people do make you feel that way. So I think that I can't tell you something that will just solve any anxiety you may have about this, but know that the people who matter and the people who, you know, care about Magic are welcoming to people who are newer or don't understand what's going on or even are just nervous, like all of those things. And if you can't find those people at your local shop, then you might not be at the right local shop.
Right.
And I've been at shops that have toxic people, and I've been at shops that are very welcoming, and it can sometimes be a little hard to tell which one it is until you start getting into it. But it's not like, you know, I've kind of said this on the show before. It's not on you as a newer player to show up to try to change how a shop is, unless you feel like you have unless you feel like you have the fortitude or stamina to do that. And if you do, great. If you feel like, you know, someone's being a jerk, you get to stand up to them and be like, hey, you're being a jerk. Don't do that. And, that's totally cool if you can, but don't feel obliged to. It is on, like Marshall said, the more experienced players, like it's on you to do that. If people aren't being welcome at the shop you frequent, and you're one of the people who gets listened to, who is a regular, who has a lot of, social standing and currency there, like that's on you to make that happen. Like you are the person who's letting the kind of the evil forces gatekeep, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, I don't go to local shops anymore, unfortunately. Like it's just rare when I do.
I don't either. But, I go for pre-releases and that's it.
Yeah. But there were times when I did. And sometimes, I think I was helpful in terms of making shops less toxic. Sometimes I didn't say anything. And, that's kind of something I regret, but I wasn't always well known, or I wasn't always me, right? I was a random kid who went to a card shop for plenty of my life.
Yeah. I think that one thing, Chris, to look at is just to find a motivation, right? Like I said, part of my motivation was I wanted to beat those players, at Magic, but also my motivation switched to cultivating a better environment, right? And like you said, it's not on Chris or anybody to do it, but if you do feel like you have the personality, the skill set, which I feel like I did, then that motivated me too. I wanted to play in a place.
It is on the people who consider it their local shop and have been there long enough to not be afraid of the people there. Like,
yep, totally.
It's not on the newcomers to do that. Is more my point. So
yeah, exactly. Next question comes from Steve, who says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, love the show. You guys are great. Thanks for helping me improve my game, blah, 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 etc. Now let's get to the important things. Do you like sour cream and onion chips? Also, what is your top 5 power rankings of chip flavors?"
That's a weird, like,
the important stuff, Luis.
Like, what's your top 5 power ranking is a good question. Do you like sour cream and onion chips? But kind of combining them is kind of weird. Like, you're trying to say that sour cream and onion is just the best chip, or what's going on here?
There does feel like there's a presumption here from Steve that sour cream. Do I like sour cream and onion chips? Sure, I never buy them though.
I don't buy chips, and again, it's not because I'm some paragon of health, even though I wish I was. It's because chips. Have I explained my EV calculation when it comes to food before? I think I have on the show.
You just don't like crunchy things.
I don't like crunchy things, but that really goes into this calculation, which is if something's going to be unhealthy, I really better love it. Because I eat unhealthy things, but I love them. I don't like eating unhealthy things that I don't love. That's part of the reason I tend not to eat fast food very much, because sure, fast food tastes fine. I'm not going to be one of those people who thinks it just tastes like garbage, because realistically it doesn't. They put a bunch of salt and fat in there because to make it taste good, but it doesn't taste good enough. Like if I'm going to spew my calories on bad things, they're going to be delicious, like homemade mac and cheese or something like that. Like, that's the sort of thing I'm in for. I'm not really in for a bag of chips. It just doesn't do it for me. So I have no rankings here.
Yeah, I'm kind of into that. I did make 4 rankings because I guess I like chips, even though I rarely buy them. Number 1, salt. Just salt on a potato is fantastic. 2, salt and vinegar, which is like salt but more. Jalapeno chips, which I spelled wrong apparently. There we go. I really like. There's these ones called Tim's CFB. Yeah, I know. I know that. Here, let me. But I did. There's these chips up here called Tim's Cascade chips that I really like, and they have jalapeno ones that I really like, and then cheddar and sour cream ruffles are on the list too. I do not have a 5th. Jason says, "Congrats on the MC top 8, Luis. Great job as usual on commentating, Marshall. You've talked about your favorite set to draft. What's your favorite set for sealed?"
Ooh, I love doing cube sealed. There you go. Kind of cheating, but I've gotten to play in some big cube sealed before, because the Magic Online Championships, sometimes those have been cube sealed, and it's kind of sweet doing cube sealed when all the cards are awesome.
I think, I don't ever remember like a sealed format that stood out to me so much that I'm like, but I do remember one of the con sets being really fun for sealed, like with the morphs and stuff. So it's probably Cons of Tarkir. Mark says, longtime listener and love the show, guys. Was wondering, as I think everyone else has one. What is your favorite build-around cards you have ever played with in Limited? Cards like Secret Plans or Laboratory Maniac have been my personal favorites. Keep up the good work.
I think for me, Burning Vengeance might be my all-time favorite. But what's showing you why we like Innistrad so much is Burning Vengeance and Spider Spawning are like two of my top 5 all favorite, and they're both in Innistrad.
Yeah, I have them. I have both of those on my list as well. And I also have Secret Plans. I think that Mark was totally right. That card was fantastic. Lab Maniac, whatever, take it or leave it. But Spider Spawning's number 1 for me for sure.
Yeah.
Matt says, instant design challenge. Build us your invitational card, but with a couple of constraints. 1, it's a 2/2 creature. 2, it's at least good in Limited. How about 2 and a blue 2/2? Where should we go from here? Jellyfish.
You could do better than that. Come on.
I can't do better than that. I mean, I can maybe come up with a more creative design, but
I've got one. Blue for a 2/2, and at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card and then discard a card. If the card you discarded was a spell, this gets +1/+1 against flying until end of turn.
Wow, you just snap that off?
Well,
all right,
I have a lot of cards I've thought about over the years that I've never done anything with.
Okay. How about
this is good because it's like it helps you loot after you've gotten a really bad draw or mulligan or whatever, things that I'm very well acquainted with.
Yeah, but then it's decent later.
And it's like a spell. It's a little bit of a spell build around where you get an extra reward if you're discarding an instant or sorcery. But it's not because I meant instant or sorcery when I said spell. But it also you don't have to discard those for it to be decent.
Well, I don't know. I every time I think of my favorite 2/2s, it's always like my favorite cards, like Muldrifter and Mana War and stuff like that. What's some ability that I'd like to see? I like anything with smoothing.
So I think something you might like would be like 2 blue for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, return probably target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand and scry 1.
Oh yeah, God, I would love that. Okay,
it's a little bit of a different twist on the Mana War. It's obviously still in the same vein, but there's a reason they keep reprinting this card is because these cards tend to play pretty well. And this wouldn't be a constructed level card, but I think it would be pretty decent. It would be quite good and limited.
Yeah, I like it. I'm in. Luis designed my card for me. Let's see. Love the show and Grass to LSV on his one and only MC top 8. I guess you have to start somewhere, right? Nice. Mark says, hi, Marshall and Luis. This question is more for Luis as it relates to Pro Tour MC team testing. With a lot of the pro community being really good friends, how come certain groups don't test together more than it seems that they should? For example, Huey has known Mike Sigris for decades, and Luis is good friends with both Huey and Owen, but the Ultimate Guard team doesn't test with Team CFB. Why is that? Is it because they like to beat each other rather than to play together like LeBron and Durant? That's pretty good. Some relationships are stronger than others. Maybe not all the members of one team get along with certain members of other teams. Just curious.
Well, part of it, and I guess Mark has kind of alluded to it is, yeah, I am friends with Huey and Owen. I am friends with a lot of people who I don't test with, but it's because we all can't test with everyone we're friends with because the community is pretty small. Like, it's pretty tight knit. Not everyone is friends with everyone, obviously, but it's more like realistically, we can't just. It doesn't really make sense to make a 50-person team. So.
Mm-hmm. So there just has to stop somewhere because of just team dynamics, right? I mean,
and what will often happen is something like I'm pretty much a lock to test with like Paulo and Josh and Pat Cox, the guys on like Team CFB, and once we get to like 6 or 7, then maybe we test with like one other team, but we can't do much more than that. Whereas like Owen's always going to test with Huey, Finkel, Reed. Cuneo, like their team Ultimate Guard, right? That's already 6, and then they have another team there, and all of a sudden we just can't combine these two groups. Plus, it's also good that I think there's multiple good teams. There's plenty of teams from all over the world that can bring cool stuff, and Haru Latin always does really well. They made the finals of the team series last year. Like, I think that there's a lot of good international teams, and even though there's some mixing, like, Christian Calcano's an MTG Mint card, even though he's from the US, like, there is plenty of there is plenty of good different teams that it makes rooting more interesting. And yeah, it's obviously a lot less interesting when when Kevin Durant joins the Golden State Warriors. I think it does not necessarily lead to the most interesting. It might be the hardest road, but
and you do have to manage personalities too, right? I mean, look, this is a large group of very opinionated people. Not everybody's going to like each other in every professional environment.
Yeah, not everyone likes each other equally. There are some personality conflicts. Like one good example. No, actually, I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, who do you really hate in the pro community?
But it's more like people have, people they're really good friends with and they're always going to test with. And there's people who they are friendly with, but like they don't feel a particular urge to test together. So it's not different from any other group of 150 people who it's advantageous to split into groups of roughly 6 to 15. But how those get determined is just going to come down to a lot of different random small factors.
Indeed. And then Mark also says, if I'm coming to DC in June, that Ben has another German box for me. That's awesome. I got a chance to meet Mark and get a big hug from him. And we had a chat about some tough times that he was going through at some point. And he said that the show helped him out with that. Yeah. And I got to say that's the kind of thing, man, that you just can't, there's a lot of buzz when you have a show as big as ours, right? That we just get a lot of feedback, a lot of people. There's, threads and are they doing this and why doesn't this? And it's easy to get caught up in it. But I tell you what, one hug from Mark or, somebody like that. And you realize I'm really glad I'm doing this. And so thanks, Mark. Ben says, thanks for the content. You guys have got me from a noob to winning F&M draft pretty consistently. Great. Can you give a quick overview of the current bot drafts on Arena? I was pretty good at drafting the current set, but when I go back to the previous set to draft on Arena, I do pretty terrible.
I cannot.
They update them. Yes, we know, Luis. You're such a purist. They do update the draft bots. And sometimes they tell us about it and then they kind of leave them for a while. Right now, it feels like they've been in the same spot for quite a while. There's certain cards that they undervalue. The main difference that you'll find is the Gates deck still. If you find, I
think you misunderstood the question, which is why I said I can't help. Currently, the ranked draft format is Guilds of Ravnica, the previous set. Ben's asking, when I go back to the previous set to draft, I do badly. And
I'm sorry. Okay, so how do I answer this?
Well, the answer is neither of us know.
Yeah,
so I wasn't being snarky when I said I can't help. It's because I haven't gone back and drafted guilds yet.
I haven't either. Sorry, Ben.
And so that's not something that we can help. Though there are a lot of people streaming Magic these days. So if you have a little time to check out a stream or two, someone is probably drafting ranked, and you can get a good sense of it. But I suspected neither of us had gone back to draft guilds and aren't super likely to do so.
Wow, and for once you weren't being snarky. Interesting.
I was being useful.
Matt, you were. Matt says, hey, Marshall and Luis, I'd love to hear more about what goes into preparing for a Pro Tour / Mythic Championship, both on an individual basis and as a team. From Luis's perspective, we've heard about Team CFB Limited meeting some, and I'd love to hear about any other prep that the team does that won't give away any trade secrets. From Marshall's perspective, if I'm remembering right, you got to sit in on the PGO's prep before Worlds last year, and I'd love to hear anything about what they do that you feel comfortable sharing. I have to imagine that the approaches are different, as I saw Owen tweet a photo of Reed playing with the team from the hotel room last Saturday night, and Luis responded saying that he was getting dinner and then going to bed. Finally, if you'll permit me a brief dip into the constructed realm, how does Luis decide what deck he's going to play? Notably, it seemed like all of Team CFB were playing White Weenie at PTGRN, but then at the Mythic Championship, they were playing different decks. Thanks a bunch. Keep up the great work. All right, so first things first, team testing for Limited, what's the difference between like the way that you guys do it and the way other teams do it that you know of?
Well, I don't know because I'm not on the other teams. Other teams have limited meetings, but I imagine they're run a little bit differently. I actually can't. I don't even think it's much of a secrecy thing. I just have never really thought to ask.
Okay. What about what Matt pointed out about Owen tweeting a photo of Reed playing with the team? This is actually different because, as Matt noted, this is Saturday night, so this is before the top 8, which is kind of a different scenario.
Yeah,
that's before the.
I wouldn't say that our teams prepare for Constructed drastically differently. We all just play a lot of games and try to figure out what might be a good way to attack the meta game. It just so happens that when I feel practiced and I make top 8. I tend not to play the night before the top 8 unless there's something I want to figure out. Also, I I tend to like having my team play for me. That's the whole point of a team. And when I don't make top 8 and someone else on my team does, I usually practice and try to help them as well. So like for the Team Pro Tour where Ben Stark, Josh, and Martin made top 4, I played a bunch of games of our deck against, Josh's first matchup because I wanted to see what I could recommend for him. And I have found it personally more valuable to get sleep and relax than to spend a bunch of time playing. Whereas the people who don't have to play the next day are usually much more willing to jump in. So,
yeah. For me, I did get to sit with the PGO or the Ultimate Guard Pro team for their prep for Worlds. And I mean, look, just out of respect for them, I don't want to get into any details about what they did, but I will just say that they were very diligent and very hardworking. They had 8 hours and then another couple of stretches of 2 or 3 hours, and they used all of it. They clearly wanted to get as many team sealed builds in as possible, and then start to get a feel for how the decks played and then get into the team build again. And I thought that their approach was, overall quite professional. They did not mess around. There was a little bit of joking here and there. I mean, Owen was in the room, but beyond that, they were very, I think diligent is the way that I would describe it. They were very serious about getting as much testing as they could done because they really wanted to win that thing. And they did. Constructed, how do you pick what deck you're going to play in Constructed?
Yeah. It's a combination of what do we think the metagame is going to look like, because that really determines the most, to what decks we think are intrinsically good or powerful or are good in the event that our metagame predictions are bad. Because sometimes we can be pretty confident about what we're going to face, and sometimes we're like, yeah, I really don't know what's going to happen. Like for Modern, it's like, which of these 20 good decks are going to be 5% and which are going to be 10%? It's really hard to tell because that just is kind of random. So, if you look at the decks that we tend to play in Modern events, they tend to be very proactive, like Death Shadow, for example, or KCI. So yeah, I lean towards that for most Pro Tours. If you look at all the decks I played at Pro Tours, it's a lot of white weenie or this Phoenix deck's very proactive, doesn't really care about what the opponent's doing. I tend to like those decks a lot more. So I try to usually just look for a good proactive deck.
Peter says, hey guys, thanks for all you do. I find it often takes me a game or two to really understand a deck I've drafted, and therefore my play patterns and even card choices can be pretty suboptimal in the first match. Do you have any advice on how to get a handle on a deck just by looking at the list without having to play it first? It's really interesting, Peter, because I actually find that I sometimes have that similar situation where I think on paper, okay, this all makes sense. This looks good. This usually, by the way, has to do with building a sealed pool for a GP or a tournament like that, where I'm trying to really gauge to what greed level I should actually go, right? Should I be splashing this really great card or should I not? That kind of thing. And sometimes what I'll do after I build is I'll just do some test draws of it, even if it's not against another player, but ideally it would be. And sometimes I do feel like I go, dude, what are you doing? Snap out of it. This isn't the right build for sure. You're going to be drawing this thing all game and it doesn't really make sense. And, sometimes you can kind of convince yourself of things when they're on paper and then you need to play it. Unfortunately, at the higher levels, like a GP, you have to submit your deck. And while you could do some test draws before you did so, usually the time goes pretty quickly and you end up building it. And this is a real skill that it takes a while to develop of, convincing yourself of something on paper versus actually figuring out what it does, when you pick it up to play. Any advice? How do you get a handle on a deck just by looking at the list? I mean, first things first, be realistic.
Yeah,
right?
I think you should look at what your common paths to victory are. When I'm looking at an Orzhov deck and determining whether I should play 1 or 2 Dead Revels, the answer is mostly 2, but it's how am I winning this game? And if I have a couple Grasping Thralls, then I'm going to need to win the game with Grasping Thralls and Dead Rebels. Or should I play this Gate Colossus in the deck with 3 or 4 gates? Well, if I'm led on win conditions, I will. If I'm not, then I generally won't. Or this actually came up at the Mythic Championship where I drafted a very aggressive Rakdos deck, but the last 4 or 5 cards were kind of mediocre. And I had Mortify, Grasping Thrall, 2 Final Payments, and an Orzhov Guildgate. So I could easily splash if I wanted to, but I ended up deciding it wasn't worth it because, first of all, the deck had good removal. I didn't need to splash Final Payment and Mortify. And then second of all, it had a really good aggressive game plan that even if, yes, Feral Maw is not a very good card, when you go Spear into Feral Maca, into like Roustabout, into a removal spell, like that's still pretty good, even if some of those cards aren't very good. And I ended up not splashing, though I sided into the splash depending on what I faced. And you have to really just say, like, how is this deck winning? How does like splashing or playing different card choices disrupt that? Because it's not always just splash. And sometimes it's like, do I need a Wrecking Beast in this Simic deck? And if it's like, well, I have a couple Sore Form hybrids. See, I know the name now. Then you're less likely to need Wrecking Beast because you have a bunch of these like free 6/6s. But what if your 2-drops are Territorial Boars and you don't actually have a big adapt creature? Then it's all of a sudden like, I kind of need a Wrecking Beast to close out the game when I draw a lot of lands. So,
yeah, I think that's interesting because you covered a lot of the different territories there that are things that you would want to know about a deck. Like, how do I win the game? What does my curve look like? What does my removal suite look like? What's my overall power level for this deck? That these type of things that you might want to make some adjustments to the cards that you splash or don't splash based on those. And what I would do, Peter, is try to figure out the ones that you're getting stuck on. Like, for example, if you play out your deck and you realize, I just don't have any way to win. And I just didn't really grok that when I had the deck in front of me. But when I started playing, it became apparent that, like, I don't have 2 Grasping Throws and 2 ways to bring them back or whatever. And, maybe that's the thing that you're getting stuck on. Maybe it's your curve. Maybe it's your suite of removal. Maybe it's your splashes. And start to figure out the things that each time you do actually play the deck after not really feeling confident, that you're like, I did it again. I built a deck that didn't have a way to win the game, or I overlooked, I splashed for things that I actually fundamentally had already covered, and I took on risk that I didn't need to. When you play it out, right? You're like, wow, I can't cast this Mortify, but I'm sitting here with these other removal spells in my hand that are just, that are on par. And then start to keep a mental note of that. And I think what you'll be able to do is narrow those down over time. It is an experience game, though, that you're asking about, Peter. Martin says, hey guys, Luis mentioned on the last show that their listing of the rares with respect to how they rate the best uncommons and commons would be posted somewhere. I guess this is right. This is for the team meeting thing. Is it available at this time? It would be great to have a look.
Let me check. I think, yes, actually I can. I'm going to post it right now in the notes here.
Okay, I can put that in the show notes then if that's cool.
Yeah. Posted.
All right, sweet. Whoa, hello. There we go. Top Ethereal Absolution Ooze. I like it. What is this list? What am I looking at?
The top is the cards that are the rares that are better than everything. Ethereal Absolution, Biogenic Ooze, Angel of Grace, Domri, Hydroid Krasis, Judith, Mass Manipulation. Lumbering Battlement was actually like, I would asterisk that because we were debating that still. Some people thought it was, some people didn't. But Ravager Wurm are off of the scales. Skargan Hellkite, Spawn of Rixmati, Sphinx of Foresight, Theater of Horrors, Zegana. So these are all the cards that if you open them, pick one, pack one, just take them. Like, you actually don't. And part of the reason we do this when we talk about them in the limited discussion is for people who haven't drafted with some of these cards, and you just need to know, like, if you open a Judith, you're clear just to take her, and don't have to worry about, like, what else is in the pack. Like, yes, you should look at it, but, like, you don't have to debate, because here's the disaster scenario, and this is actually what spawned this limited meeting, is this happening too many times. You sit down, it's draft at the PT, this is the big show, this is what you've been prepared for, and you open a mythic you've never played with before, and a good uncommon, or a good common even, and you're like, wow, I haven't actually played with Mass Manipulation, because that's like one of the cards on this list where, had you not played with it or had people listen to it, you're like,
yeah, you might get scared off by the mana cost.
Is this really better than Skewer or like Sharktocrab? Our conclusion is yes, and that you should take it. And that helps with people who haven't had a chance. Like, look, it's not hard for Ethereal Absolution or Biogenic Ooze or Hydroid Krasis, right? Like, you don't have to have drafted to realize these are just like the nuts. But what about Domri? It's a planeswalker. Domri does some kind of weird stuff. But yes, our conclusion is you should take this. So that's the first tier. The second tier is cards that are below the best uncommons, which we have as Sharktocrab, Consume, Consecrate, and Guardian. I don't know what.
That's not Guardian Project. I think it's the 2/2 that becomes a 4/4 for Adapt, right?
Oh, No, but we were talking about uncommons. I don't actually remember which uncommon.
Oh yeah, that's a rare. Yeah, you're right.
That was there.
Is it Guardian Project?
No, because that's a rare also.
Oh yeah, duh.
I don't know. These are from someone's notes, I guess. But so this second tier is below maybe Gatebreaker Ram. Oh, I know. Troll-Bred Guardian. There it is.
Oh, the notorious TBG, of course.
Yes, Troll-Bred Guardian. So Sharktocrab, Troll-Bred Guardian, and Consume Concentrate are the three best uncommons, and we believe that those are better than Biomancer's Familiar, Bedeck, Bedazzle, Dovin, Guardian Project. A couple other cards. There's some notes in here too, and these are the cards that we debated. But in general, we think if you open Kaya's Wrath and Sharktocrab, you should take Sharktocrab. Mm-hmm. And part of it is Kaya's Wrath has a weird mana cost and all that. Some people think Mesmerizing Benthid is better than all these things because it's single colored. I actually think that even though there's such a good defensive play, I've liked Sharktocrab a little bit more to start with. But if you took any card in this second tier, you over the good uncommons, you would be fine still. It's pretty close. Right. Then the next tier is Gatebreaker Ram, Mortify, and Gate Colossus. And the cards that go below those.
Okay.
So Tome of the Guild Cap, Pack, Precognitive Perception, cards like that. And then the next tier the next tier is the best commons: Blade Juggler, Skewer, Grotesque, Demise. Mm-hmm. So these are cards like Deputy of Detention, which we think is just a little worse than those good commons.
Okay.
And then the last tier we have, I think. Oh, wait, no, we have a couple more tiers. There's a lot of tiers here. The next tier is below Chillbringer and Final Payment. And so how it looks when we're laying this out is we have each tier marked and then put the cards in that tier.
Okay. But the tier itself is represents the borderline. Yeah,
the tier itself is it's not that we think that Chillbringer and Final Payment are only two cards in that tier, but that we're not trying to put every single card out again. But this is
right.
This is cards in that range. So, and then it's below Aeromunculus and Summary Judgment. You can see we're getting a little worse here, right?
Right.
And then the next tier, there's no card. It's just tier 7 is playable. So these are cards which we think are playable in the right spot, but aren't great. And then lastly, it's just bad cards that you shouldn't play.
Okay. Oh man, poor Font of Agonies didn't make the cut.
Yeah. So yeah, you can post that with the show notes, and that's kind of our where we had landed on all these rares. We talked about all the rares too.
Nice. I like it. Next one comes from Ben Gray, who says, hello, Marshall and LSV. Now that LSV is in the league as a GOAT with Finkel, is it time to see him play Storm in a modern Mythic Championship? Thanks again for your time and work.
Look, I'll play Storm if it's good, but I won't if I don't think it's good, is basically how it comes down to it. Trust me, I love Storm. I've played a lot of Vintage and Legacy Storm over the years, a lot. And I force it in Cube all the time. But one of the things which I think is probably getting over now that I keep saying it is on the show is that when I'm in these tournaments, I just try to do what I think will give me the best chance of winning. I posted a Rakdos deck and someone's like, who are you and what have you done with LSP? It's I'm playing for $50,000. I'm going to a Rakdos deck if that's what's open. I'm not this isn't me goofing around on my stream. It's just funny because most of the way people see me is in this role or here on the show with you where we're having a good time. But the fact of the matter is I am a fierce competitor. I care about the results of the tournament. So
if somebody started following you in the last 10 years, they would be like, oh, the white weenie guy.
Right. I always find it so weird when people are like, wow, you're playing White Weenie. That's not really your kind of deck. Where it's yeah, that's true. But it's also true that my kind of deck is the one that I believe will give me the highest chance of winning the tournament. So.
Right. That is definitely your kind of deck when it comes to playing at the Mythic Championship level. Tyson says, Marshall and Luis, love the content. Thank you. 2 questions. What is the best approach to learning how to game plan with your deck instead of merely just playing the cards? The best cards from your hand. And 2, how does one learn how to evaluate the same card but in the context of drafting versus the context of sealed? This is good. What is the best approach to learning how to game plan with your deck? So Look, Tyson, you're onto something here. You say instead of merely just playing the best cards in your hand. And that really is how it comes down, because in any given turn, you usually only have like one or two options in most cases, right? At least certainly during the development quadrant where you're kind of building out your stuff, you can say, well, I've got 4 mana, so I can either play this 4-drop or maybe this 3-drop. And the real question is that, or the real nuts and bolts of it is that in probably something like 85% of cases, your default stance should be to use up as much mana as you possibly can. And especially that counts for when you're building out, from turns 0 through 6, 7, something like that. But if you want to be really good at this game, you have to be critically thinking about each of those decisions, because there are times, again, not that often, 10, 15, 20% of the time or whatever, that it is correct to instead use less mana or to do the less powerful thing first. And that's counterintuitive, because at a super base level, you sit down and you're like, well, I got this great card, I'm going to play it. That's how this works. But there's a lot of reasons, a lot of strategic reasons why that sometimes is not the case. And then the real tricky part is that a lot of times people learn that and then they go, okay, I know this. I don't play my best card first because it might die to removal, or my opponent might have a counterspell or whatever. So I'm instead going to play my worst card first. And that is not always correct, because A, you may have evidence that shows you that your opponent does not have the card that you fear, and you need to be paying attention to that. And B, some cards reward you greatly for being on the battlefield longer, and it actually makes the risk-reward proposition back in casting the more powerful card's favor, because if every turn that it's on the battlefield, you're generating some huge advantage, it often is correct to instead, just go ahead and run it out there. But if a card will win you the game regardless, for example, then and you're not under intense pressure, then the strategy shifts back to take the safe route and just get this thing resolved and stuck on the battlefield, because then I will win the game inevitably. So these are all factors that you have to be going through when you do this, and you have to do this every time you're going to cast a spell. So Magic's hard. A lot of times you won't have a choice, right? It's just like, well, I have a 4-mana spell. I don't really have anything else I can cast. I'll cast my 4-mana spell and you just move on. And that's fine. And again, a good default is to use up your mana as much as possible. But you need to weigh the scales every single time you make a play. And it can be taxing, but it does start to become muscle memory at some point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The other thing is you have to know, you should have a general idea of what your deck is trying to accomplish before you even play any games, right? When you drafted an Azorius deck with a bunch of flyers and some slime binds and sky tethers, like pretty clearly your goal is to go flyer and then remove or prevent their attackers for long enough for your flyers to kill them. Or you have a Rakdos deck with 3 Blade Jugglers. You're just getting all those 1 and 2 drops in there. So it's not going to change too much. The more linear your deck is, the more often you're going to have the same plan. And that actually, in some ways, makes it much easier, because you know that your Rakdos deck, once it starts chump blocking, is probably just dead. Like, that's just not what the deck is trying to do. Whereas the flyer deck is fine chump blocking as long as it's racing with flyers still. And where it becomes really hard, Tyson, is when your game plan has to shift, or your deck is more of a generic limited deck that just does not have a focused game plan, which is fine. Not every limited deck is going to have that. Like, we've all drafted decks that are just like, here's 15 creatures and here's 8 spells, 7 or like 6 of them are removal spells and 2 of them are combat tricks. And I'm going to try to react to what my opponent does and formulate the best plan to win the game. And there's no
at any given moment.
Yeah. Because sometimes it's like, oh, I got an aggressive draw, so I'm going to go 2-drop, 3-drop, kill your 2 things, attack you. But sometimes it's like, I have a good 3-drop and a good 4-drop, and I'm playing defense for a few turns, and I guess now I'm going to try to kill your 1 thing and then attack and use this combat trick, but I'm still lower on life, so I'm not really the aggressor. And that's just the morass that most limited games fall into. And honestly, like, there's no quick and easy way to learn what your plan is. And I don't want people to think that having a plan means you always have a focused plan you have to stick to. I more mean, don't take actions at random. Don't just cast your cards because they're there. Know that, like, hey, I want to use the combat trick to punch my 4/4 past their 1/6 because then I can start getting in for damage. Not, I'm just going to use this because it's there, because sometimes it's like, I could do that, but honestly, I think I'm going to win the game with this like 3/3 flyer that's in my hand. Why don't I just let their 1/6 blank my 4/4 and I'll save my trick for if they play their own flyer?
Yeah.
And that's way more what I want to see than card in hand, attack, use card, like just for no reason.
Right. Other question from Tyson was, how does one learn how to evaluate the same card, but in different contexts like drafting and sealed? You have to understand the fundamental differences, primarily dealing with speed and availability of like linear archetypes, mainly that they're generally not available in sealed. And then you need to understand the specific differences between the set that you're playing, draft format and sealed format. And we try to cover that on the sealed episode, but those are the things, that's how you learn, Tyson, is that it's a specific case by case basis where you're taking a generality and then you're also taking more specifics and then you're applying it to each card. Generally speaking, they end up being about the same, right? A really good card in draft is often a really good card in sealed. Power level is power level in many scenarios. It's just you need to look out for the exceptions where there's cards that get opened up that you may not find viable in draft, but then all of a sudden become viable in sealed. And switch that as well. There's some cards that work out pretty well in draft that if you play in sealed, you're probably just making a mistake. William says, first of all, I want to congratulate Luis on his top 4 finish at the Mythic Championship. As for questions, what theories do you guys have in regards to what we might see in War of the Spark or things you would like to see in the set? So that's, I assume, the name of the next set.
Yeah, it seems like from some of the information we've seen, it's implying there's a lot of planeswalkers and there's like some kind of gimmick, but I don't actually know anything. Things I would like to see good gameplay and some nice build arounds in limited. Yeah,
me too. That's what I want to see.
It's kind of funny. It's not to say that we don't get excited about new sets. We definitely do. Like, both of our favorite show is often the Sunset Show because that means we get to stop talking about a set we've drafted so many times.
Yeah.
Especially in the position we're in with set reviews and knowing we're going to just draft infinite and talk, and I'm going to play a lot of constructed and all these things. I actually don't get excited about spoilers. I just don't. Like, sometimes a card will come up and I'm like, oh, that's a neat card. That's awesome. And that'll like be really cool. But honestly, sometimes like the whole set will come out and I just won't even look through the spoiler until I'm going to do my set review. Cause like, it's really cool getting to play with these cards, but getting to read them, it just doesn't do the same for me.
Yeah, I'm similar. I mean, I think that, that happens with time after you kind of get used to the cycles. And also it's a job for us on top of it. But I would say I don't get excited also, but I'm also interested. Yeah. Like I want to know what's in there, but I don't have like an emotional reaction unless they really print something cool. That was that one. Yeah, there we go. Janusz says, greetings from Poland, my friends. Recently I moved most of my wonderful playgroup from drafting ongoing sets to a cube environment. I built and developed my own cube for over a year with 400 cards, and I'm stuck at what to do next. I use the fantastic CubeTutor.com or other resources, but I don't want or can't afford to copy paste vintage or legacy cubes. At the same time, I'm missing the knowledge and framework of building the whole set with multiple working color pairs, hidden combos, and etc. That is a tough spot. I do want to be better at this, so I'm listening closely to the set reviews and any remark, comment, or observations about how a perfect draft experience should look, but it's not quite enough. Can you help steer me, please? I know I'm not the only one building cubes and looking for frameworks like this. So this is really interesting because I think a lot of people that want to step into the world of cube find themselves in a similar position where it's a completely daunting, overwhelming task. But there are people out in the community that are very, into this stuff. Adam Staborski, I'll mention him in a little bit. He manages Pauper Cube. He has a Patreon and stuff where he does updates so that you don't have to. Like you can just sign up and then you'll get the updates from the new sets telling you what to take out and what to put in. And you'll have this like balanced Pauper Cube that doesn't cost you a lot of money. And then, of course, you've got some of the big hitters in the cube community out there that you can probably. I would probably ask them on Twitter or whatever and try to get lists and stuff from them because for me, it's like you have to be so insanely good at this stuff to like really get all the way into designing a cube, and that might be worth it for some people. But like for me, I just wanted to own like a really good cube. I don't actually own one, but I'm saying if I was into it, then that's what I would want. I would probably just try to copy somebody else's hard work rather than learning game design from the ground up.
Yeah, but I can help Janice here, especially since I do actually do work in game design. So one of the things you can do is look at what each color is trying to do and have sub-themes within that color, and then have themes that overlap with other colors. So an example of this is the editor of Channel Fireball, actually, Andy Cooperfaus. He had a cube for a really long time that was a lot of fun. And one of the themes he had was this red, black, white sacrifice, where black had a bunch of cards like Cabal Therapy and Carrion Feeder, cards that Bloodghast, cards that normally weren't in cubes, that worked nicely with cards in black and white that either made tokens or red and white that made tokens or sacrificed for an effect or gave you a sack outlet. And by seeding, like, I think it was around 10 cards in black and 5 in white and 5 in red or something along those lines, it was just a new deck to draft. And what you can do is do stuff like, I mean, some of the obvious one is like you put in Kiki Jiki, Zealous Conscript, Splinter Twin, Pestermite Deceiver, Exarch, and Restoration Angel, and all of a sudden you have a deck. You have a whole archetype with 6 cards. So look for ways to support these different decks. And, you know, like, let's say you're doing an uncommon common cube or something, right? And you're like, well, I'm going to put in Basking Rootwalla, Wild Mongrel, Reckless Wurm, Careful Study, Frantic Search, and just have like a Madness deck that goes across red, blue, and green. And try to think of just ways to promote these decks and ways to make these decks work. And then you have cards like Frantic Search, which also is good in Reanimator, you know, which is also good in Storm. And all of a sudden you have cards that overlap. So I think seeding your cube with these like engine cards that lead to build arounds is a really good way to make the drafting experience more interesting. And you can also tune and adjust it. Like, it turns out like, Reanimator kind of sucks. I actually don't really want that in my cube. You can just take out the reanimation spells and you move on with your life. So I would just look for cool build arounds, and then make sure you just have good cards in every color that are just fun to play with. Like, Muldrifter works in a lot of combo decks, but it's just intrinsically a fun card. So having a Muldrifter in your cube is pretty sweet.
Agree.
Or the standalone powerful cards. Like Armageddon is one of the cards that makes it so mono-white aggro actually has a chance against more powerful decks. So just having that card in there goes a long way.
Next one comes from Stefan, who says, "Hi, Marcel and Luis. I'm a longtime listener since John Laux. Ooh, baby. And I love listening to your show. I recently started getting back into Magic after a short hiatus and have been playing Arena. Yesterday, I was playing a Simic Mirror in Draft, and the board got so congested that I completely missed a block that caused me to lose the game. While I take full responsibility for what happened, I can't help but think that it wouldn't have happened in paper Magic. What can I do to be more focused on what's actually happening in a game, especially with complicated board states, so that I don't miss something like this again, instead of counting on the interface to do a lot of the mental work for me?" No easy way out here, right?
Yeah, not really. Like, I think just trying to pay attention to what's going on, and it's hard. I actually think that Arena breaks down a little bit when it comes to attacking and blocking, especially on complicated boards. Like, the creatures moving around as you click on them and stuff really drives me crazy. So
it makes a little line that shows you where it's at so that you can, before you lock it in, you can know. But it can be especially on a really built out board like Stefan faced here. It is. I mean, it's, to be fair, it's actually like that in real life too. But Magic's just not. Humans aren't really built to be able to manage 15 blocks, right? without seeing it. I think, just a really simple tip for Stefan, right, is just like set up all of your blocks and then just give yourself a beat where you say, okay, these are what my blocks are going to look like. Before I hit this button that locks that in, just visually double check again, right? I mean, this is like the most baseline thing that you can do. But look, that would have saved Stefan in this spot where Stefan would have been like, oh, wait, there's not a line going to this one creature.
Time pressure. You also feel you're very time pressure.
If you get roped.
Yeah.
No, I know for sure. And that happens almost immediately on huge combat.
Just make sure the board doesn't get so congested.
Yeah, attack with everything and see what happens. That's a joke, of course. That is tricky. Look, this is, to me, one of the hardest parts of Magic is like a fully built out board. it's all there, right? Let's say both players don't have any, cards in their hand or whatever, and they're just like attack you with everything, and it's like 12 creatures into your 10 creatures or something like that. Look, some of the blocks are obvious, right? Like you'll just make a bunch of like the obvious, but the rest of them can start to get tricky. And once you start putting unknown information into the equation, it can get overwhelming. When they make Magic, they actively try to not have this happen because what do they call it? Decision paralysis? Yeah. Where it's like you look at a thing and you're just like, I have too many choices. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. And that's kind of a sticking point for game design. Let's answer a couple more here, Luis. We are not going to get to all of them, but that is fairly typical just because our listeners, they're insane. This one comes from Luis, a.k.a. Manowar Elves. Hey, Marshall and Luis, you guys have talked before about playing around instants, but I find myself in the position of playing around too much. Do you only play around the cards once you've seen them played? How do you improve your understanding of whether or not they have a trick? I can't thank you guys enough for the content between the podcast and the streams. I feel like I've become a much better player. P.S. What are your favorite combat tricks? I know how much you love them, Marshall, so I know it'll be tough for you to choose. Ha, ha, ha. My current favorite is Colossus for two reasons. One, it's the best combat trick basically ever. And two, it is a card named Colossus that somehow isn't a creature, which I think is really
I've read about the split card naming stuff, so I'll leave it be,
yeah.
but it's not good.
Yeah. So the interesting question though here for Manowar Elves though is dealing with the when do you play around combat tricks, instance, that kind of things. And this drives to the fundamental core of what it takes to be a great Magic player. And there's actually a correlation in real life that I came up with, which is a lawyer. Which, I didn't really understand what lawyers did until I became friends with my friend Adam and had a lot of conversations with him about how things work. And one of the things that lawyers do as a fundamental part of their job is risk management. They are paid in many ways to understand the ins and outs of the legal system, whichever part of it you might be involved in at the time, and understanding what the risks and rewards are for their individual client. And before meeting him and understanding it, I did not have a full understanding of this. I think I thought a little bit more idealistically about what lawyers were doing. For example, if you were wrongly accused of a crime and you had a lawyer to defend you, I thought that the lawyer's job was to get you free because you didn't do the thing that had happened. And it turns out that's just not the case. That's just not how it works. It's about risk management. So this is why you see people plead guilty to things that they say that they didn't do. It's because their lawyer has said, this looks so bad, or they have enough evidence, or the jury in this case is going to convict you even though you didn't do this and we know it. We can't prove it. And there's no, if there's no proof on either side, you should plead guilty and do a year in prison, even though you didn't do it. And it's like, to most people, that's just an incredible, like, how could you ever consider doing that? But if the alternative is you take, say, a 20% risk and you lose and you go to prison for life, any good lawyer would tell you, just take the year and move on with your life. When it comes to Magic, you're doing a similar thing. You're weighing out not just whether you think they have it or not. You don't just look at the player and say, well, I believe that you have this instance, so then I will play around it. It's not that simple. It's how bad is it if they do have it? Or does it even matter if they have it? That's why, like, a lot of times when I'm streaming, I'm a calling station. I'm just like, if they attack into my creature, I'm like, block, right? And then, but sometimes the chat will be like, well, what if they have this pump spell? And I'm like, that's fine, right? They're going to trade their pump spell for my creature. They're going to use up their mana and we'll move on with the game, because I've determined at that point that I accept that transaction either way. But there's times when that's not the case, right? There's a lot of times in Magic where you say, if I make this play and they have the thing, I will lose the game. And if I don't make the play, I probably will win the game anyway. It'll just be in a little while longer. And then you for sure will play. You're much more likely to play around it, even if, and this sounds weird to a lot of people, but even if you don't really think they have it, they just might. There's like a small chance that they could, but you can afford to play around it. And then there's, of course, other times where you make a similar assessment and you actually deduce that you do believe that they have it, but that if they do, there's no way for you to win the game. And then you come to this really counterintuitive conclusion that you pretend as if they do not have it and you play accordingly. because you would lose anyway. But it feels so weird to like actually come to the conclusion that they have the thing you don't want them to have and then still decide to play into it anyway, even though it's correct to do so.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is how I approach games. It's also like, what kind of deck are they? Like, if I see a Gates deck, I'm not going to play around Stony Strength, even if they're green, because Gates deck just never play that card.
Great point. Yeah, that totally, all those type of cards.
So it's basically, it's not just I play around instants because they exist. It's like, well, it's this kind of multi-step equation, which isn't mathed out. I'm not saying I see the numbers, running there, but it's how likely is this deck to have this card and play this kind of card? What cards have I seen? How much of their deck have I seen? If it's game 3 and we played 2 long games, yes, maybe they sideboarded in or it was just the bottom card both games, but it's less likely they have it. Can I play around it? Because if it's free to play around it, yeah, definitely play around it. Can I not play around it? Okay, well, if I can't play around it at all, then I'm not going to try at all. If I could maybe play around it, but it's costly, then it's like, well, how likely is it they have it based on all the different pieces of evidence? How did they play earlier this game? Did they make attacks that indicated they had something? One of the things that's important, like when your opponent makes an attack that seems weird early in the game, and let's say you decide, okay, I'm not going to block because I have a 3/3 flyer, they're attacking with a 2/2, and my creature is just a lot more valuable, and you don't block. Like 3 or 4 turns later, you should still be thinking, what is this card? What did this, like,
right?
One of those possibilities is they had nothing and they bluffed you, and that's totally fine. You have to think that could be a possibility as well. But you do have to kind of keep it in your head. They made a statement, and their statement was, I have something that makes attacking this 2/2 into your 3/3 good. And sometimes they'll do something like, they play a spectacle card, right? Let's say that turn. Then it's like, oh, they were bluffing to get the spectacle card, and that's part of it. That's part of the range.
Right.
Or later they play Carnival Carnage to make you discard 2 cards, but you're like, it actually could have been that they were willing to trade their creature plus Carnage, or plus Carnival rather, the 1 damage ping for my 3/3, so that's why they attacked. And it's not like I ever draw a firm conclusion unless they go to no cards in hand, of course. But it all adds up, and part of why I feel the best when I play Magic, if I practiced a lot, is because I play on intuition, and I feel like I have the answers to all these things, or at least good approximations, even without having to think about it much.
Yeah, now you do. It's interesting because, what's really happening is, forever, sure. There's a framework, that is actually happening behind the scenes, and I've talked about this for poker as well, but I wouldn't actually mind doing this at some point. But so the problem with this is that for Magic, you cannot get the answer you want, right? Like, so I could present a scenario to you and 20 of the MPL members or whatever, right? Just like some of the best Magic players in the world. And I could say, what would you do here and why? And at the end of the day, it will be what you said. It'll be people saying, well, here's the deal. I feel like, I can afford to play around this. So in reality, there's some type of scale between 0 and 100 on how much can I play around this? And every one of those players, I could force them to pick a number and they'd be like 90, right? Like I'm very able to play around this. Okay. Then the next question they have to ask is, how likely do I think that they have it? And again, there is a number. You don't actually think of a number when you're playing. I don't think really anybody does. But if forced, right, I could say, okay, Luis, you made this play, deconstruct it for me. And you could say, well, I didn't think it was very likely that they had it. And I could say, give me a number, right? And you could say, well, I thought that there was a 20% chance roughly that they had it, somewhere in that range. And again, if I did this for 20 different players, they would all put these sliders in slightly different spots. But the beautiful thing about Magic is twofold. One, we don't know the answer, right? You don't get to, you can say that the person is 20% to have a thing, but you won't actually know if they were 20% to have the thing or if they actually have it 1 out of 5 times, because you can't run simulators, at least yet, that will reliably give us that information. That's cool. That makes Magic compelling still, because it's unsolved. The other thing is, the players who are the most, even if we can't check their math, are going to be the players who win the most. And that is also a beautiful thing. That's pure based on merit, right? It's based on the people that understood the different factors at play and estimated better than the other players. And those are the ones that are going to win. For us normal people, it can be really difficult, though, just to even manage all of the factors that you're considering.
By the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and then let alone actually getting to to the meat of it, which is to those estimates that the players are making constantly in the back of their head or whatever. So I love the question. And I mean, this to me is the really most interesting part about Magic at this point, for me. And I'm always kind of trying to figure out if there's a way that I can show this using a similar thing to what we would do in poker, where, because the difference is, and this is where like a big learning moment happens, is that a similar setup happens in poker where you're putting people on ranges of hands. But the really cool part is that you can actually extrapolate out the information and figure out, okay, well, if you were to make this play under those assumptions, this would be your rate of return. This is how much money you would make by making that play on average every time. And then you can slide that bar, right? If I say, okay, well, this person's range is, everything, every pair from twos to aces, and then some subset of, combinations of high cards like ace kings through ace jack or something like that. I could say, okay, here's how much money I make if all of those hands are the hands that opponent can have. But then I can say, well, let's say this player wouldn't do it with pocket twos, pocket threes, fours, fives, sixes, or sevens. They would only do it with eights or better, and then another subset of cards. Well, now how much money do I make or do I not make as a result of that change in my perception of what they're doing? And now, and it'll spit out another number for me. And I can say, okay, well, if I really don't think this person's capable of doing the play that they made with pocket threes, then I shouldn't make this play. But if I do, then I should. And there's some line right there where it goes from being unprofitable to profitable. And you can actually get that granular. In Magic, you can't, because I can't tell you unequivocally that, yes, you were correct about this versus not. But that to me is like the meat. That's really what's happening. That's really what the best players are best at. Even if they don't think of it necessarily under that construct, they actually are working within something similar to that. A couple more here. Ben says, Kia ora from New Zealand, guys. Hi. Longtime listener, first time caller. I'm a creative professional, a videographer, and I often find myself listening to your podcast and trying to take learnings from your show and relate them to other aspects of my life. Do you have any tips on how I can take lessons learned from Limited and or Magic and apply them to optimizing other creative fields? Thanks, Ben. Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I have to do this sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all do. It's just funny that the skills you have are useful wherever you pick them up, especially when they're transferable. And, there are some that are at their baseline, I think, very applicable, which is practice. Practice is really important. I know very, very, very few people who are great at something without practicing it. And that includes the people who are just, geniuses who don't have to work very hard at all. Like you really do have to practice to be good at something. I think that one of the biggest lessons I get from Limited/Magic that I think is really valuable for your life is learning how to lose, because one of the things, in order to be good at Magic, you have to have lost so many games of Magic, and you have to lose so many games of Magic to just the most frustrating nonsense things. Like mulled to 4 in the finals of the Pro Tour playing for $25,000, right?
Right.
How many times have I've gotten mana screwed thousands of times. I mean, you have too, Marshall. Like we both have played so many times where we had to mulligan to 5, or our opponent top deck 3 perfect cards, or, the list goes on, right? We could list it forever. But we're still here. We're still playing Magic. We're still enjoying it. We're still, competing. We're still doing this podcast. And part of that is, and you got this through poker. You didn't even probably need Magic to get this. But
I did.
Basically, we have suffered so many bad beats that when my car gets a flat tire because of something random, or when I get a parking ticket, or when someone cuts me off, like, I'm just not going to be mad about it. Like, yeah.
Nope. It's funny how much it chills you out. You're like, yeah, it'll probably happen again.
Bad things happen, or you get rejected by a person or a job or whatever. And it's like, yeah, sometimes you don't make top 8, like you basically get used to this really important lesson, which is do the best you can with the things you can control and accept the things you can't. And that just goes back to the, that old saying, right? Like, may I have the wisdom the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to accept, or the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to tell the difference. And that really is what Magic teaches you. And I found that to be a really effective tool for the rest of my life, where when when crappy things happen to good people and great things happen to bad people. And that's part of life. The sooner you accept that, the better it is. And what that doesn't mean is just give up and don't do anything. It just means do your best. Like one of the things we stress all the time, right? Don't be Roddy. Put in the best effort you can to try to get the best outcome you can. But regardless of the outcome, try to make the right decision. And
yeah, and you see this with creative stuff, by the way, to go to what Ben was asking about. And that's that you have to take these shots where you like put something out into the world, right? And sometimes it flops or it doesn't really hit the way that you had hoped. And sometimes it does. But there's this one pattern that you see with Magic players, creative professionals, kind of all around in life, is that if they take the advice that you just gave, Luis, about putting in the effort and putting out your best stuff, yes, not everything will hit, but that's just an individual result. But over the long term, people like that kill it, right? I mean, they just do, right? Like people that work, I think Reed's a great example, right? Just put in the work to be great at Magic. And yes, on any given tournament, Reed might not top 8 it, but when you look at his career now, with his 4th Mythic Championship top 8 under his belt now and that kind of stuff, it's like, okay, now we're talking about Hall of Fame, right? And it's one of those things where, he was the type of person that just does that. He just knows that you need to put in the work. And I think that's true for all endeavors, not just creative.
And, as much as it's true that you can show up and do the work and still get nothing for it, because that's how life works sometimes, over the long enough term, if you're into something that rewards hard work and dedication and skill, you will get rewarded for it. Yes, you will never win the lottery. You could play the lottery every single time and be very dedicated to that. That's not going to help you. I know very few professional or fields where someone who's talented and puts a lot of work in and has a good attitude doesn't eventually succeed to some degree. And again, every successful person caught a lot of lucky breaks, whether that's the fact that my parents could send me to college and I got to spend a lot of my time playing Magic. That's lucky. That's privilege. Mm-hmm. That really is. Yep. But everyone catches some kinds of lucky breaks to be successful, getting noticed by the right person, having, making your app hit right at the exact right time when there's a need for that, whether you predicted it or not, or all of that sort of thing can lead towards success. But the best thing you can do is, again, try hard and try smart. And if you can do those things, then you can usually get over setbacks, because a lot of the most successful people have also failed a ton of times. And learning how to kind of internalize that and learn from it is really important. So,
yeah, speaking to the creative stuff, by the way, I remember last month or maybe 2 months ago, you had Brandon Sanderson in your stream. Yeah. And I remember people were asking him a lot of questions, about his career and, how he became like a really successful, famous author and all this stuff. And it was so funny because, they were asking him about what he thought about other authors. And one of the other authors he was talking about, he was saying that he was, that there was an author that had received a whole lot of success on like their first book, right? The first thing they made like hit really hard. And he was saying, that he thought it was actually like not a great thing, right? That like there's, almost some irony to it because for his career, he had to fail a lot. And, he said, I wrote like 6 books before anybody even noticed or read anything about them.
Yeah.
And that's just like, can you imagine? Like, that's an easy sentence to say, but that was probably years and years of, writing a book. Are you serious? Like, I can't even imagine how much fortitude it would take to literally write an entire book, have nobody read it, and then go, okay, in another month, I'm going to start writing another book. Right. And then do that again. And then like now you're on your 5th book and nobody's cared about any of your books. Right. It's just, it's been 8 years. Right. It's just, I don't think people can properly contextualize that. Humans just aren't good at that. But, he felt like he was like working on his craft and really like getting to be better at this as he went. And then by the time success, the book that came together and really struck for him, he was ready for it. He had gone through the ups and downs and was ready to accept the level of success and fame and all the things that come along, with kind of reaching the top of your field. And I mean, to me, like then being able to continue that career, probably has a lot to do with the fact that he had put in the time, really understanding how to write and how to grind and how to accept those failures as well. So.
Yeah, it's It's going to play in a PTQ after busting out of 25 PTQs.
Yep, that's what it is. It's that one. And then, at some point something breaks and you get
Yeah, for sure. That's
all right. Well, great.
A pretty good question to end on, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was a great question, Ben. Thank you so much for that. And for everybody else, if you did send a question in and we didn't get to it, I do apologize. We will certainly try. We try every time to get through as many as we can. But the fact of the deal is that these questions are so good, and we like to spend our time on them because we want to go deep on the questions and really take the show about going deep.
That's for sure.
Indeed. So please retain those questions if we didn't get to it, and you can ask them on the next one or any other.
Short enough to answer, Twitter is okay, but a lot of these questions wouldn't be very good on Twitter. So kind of be mindful of that if that's what you're looking for. Though I'm pretty encouraged by the number of people who every day I wake up and someone has tagged me and Ben and you in questions about draft, which is sweet. I know Ben loves it.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. Oh, Ben, he's, I try to answer them quickly, but if Ben's already answered, I usually agree. And I'm like,
it's because if Ben answered them and I agree, I just kind of let him roll with it.
Yeah, that's what I do too. And he's a machine. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of LR. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And hopefully you learned something from it. Like every week, we strive to bring you something that's entertaining, but also informative. If you want to support the show, there's many ways to do so. One of them is via the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. Also, you can go to Channel Fireball. They've been the sponsor of the show for a long time. And we're proud of that. Channelfireball.com is where you can go, again, to find everything you need magic related on the internet. And please make sure that you check out some of the awesome content. I mean, we're part of the bigger picture of the content that comes out on CFB, but there is a lot more than just limited resources. There's articles. You can even listen to the articles in many cases now. They're like audio version of them. So it's kind of like a podcast, but it's just basically where like a written article's being read to you. That's a great way to absorb that information from some of the best magic writers of all time, like Paulo Vitor Damarosa is in the pantheon of that. And, when he comes out with a new article, you should read it. Like I can just unreservedly say, you should read that. And, if it ends up being in audio form, then, hey, that's something you can do while you're driving your work or doing the dishes or whatever, then all the better. If you want to find us on social media, we just talked about it. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. We've got, a lot of different ways to get a hold of us or to interact with the community. There's a Discord. There's a Reddit. There is, in fact, a Facebook page, Luis. There's, of course, just the website. And every other way to get a hold of us. And we love it when that happens. Thank you so much for being a part of the LR family. We really do appreciate it. All right. That's going to do it for this show. We'll talk to you next week.
So I've explained what I think, are EGAs before, ethical gray areas. And of course, on the show, we kind of express them as genius or grifter.
Yes.
And I had a couple good ones come up over the course of last weekend. The first actually as we landed. So myself, Josh Utterley, and Andrew Beckstrom, BK, as people call him for a really ridiculous reason. I'm not going to get into it, but his nickname makes no sense. Anyway, so
it really doesn't.
So BK is a great guy. I love BK. He is a goofball. And we get on the Uber, or we get into the Uber that he had summoned. This is important. As we're getting in, he's like, "Oh shoot, I left my bag on the airplane." And it was funny because coming off the airplane, I had a piece of a backpack in a bag, and Josh did the same, and BK just had a backpack. And I'm just thinking like, wow, traveling pretty light. But I didn't say it because, whatever, like he knows what he's doing. Turns out he had a bag also. So
he clearly doesn't know what he's doing. I
right.
guess.
So we're like, okay, what should we do? He's like, look, you guys just go ahead. I'm going to go back and see if I can get my bag, but it might take so long. You guys just go meet up with our testing team. So who owes what for the Uber that only me and Josh took, but BK summoned?
Well, you and Josh should split the cost for the Uber. He shouldn't be on the hook just because he did a nice thing for you. Don't punish him for it. Oh, you punished him bad, didn't you?
Okay, so here's the thing.
Oh my God. Whenever Luis says, "So here's the thing," by the way, that's a big EGA warning. Like,
he paid for the Uber.
Oh, God, that is so brutal. You guys are mean to BK.
No. First of all, BK gets all due respect. Second, I do pay for a lot of things like I've covered Ubers before. I have them over and cook and all that stuff. I figure it all kind of balances out.
I do think it was a little grifter in that, like, he basically, we each owe him an Uber. I do believe that. I think that ultimately that is what is going to end up happening. But yeah, at the time, that is not exactly what happened.
Yeah. I have to say, though, that might have been karma coming back to you in like a good way, though. Because do you remember that time when me and Dave Williams were in a Uber and we chopped you into it and you accepted and you weren't there, you were at home?
Okay, so that takes a little bit of backstory. There was actually my pin. Uber introduced Fair Split, where you could just enter someone's number or email and it would text them saying, hey, you've been requested a fare split, and if they hit yes, which of course if they're in the Uber with you they will, it just chops the fare in between you. I remember messaging Owen and asking him, hey, is it an EGA to ask someone to fare split an Uber if they're not there?
Yeah, that's right.
I requested a fare split with you and you responded like ... You weren't there. So then later when you requested a fare split as a joke and I wasn't there, I just paid.
I know. It was unbelievable. It was like from the airport too. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Because then I felt it was supposed to be funny and then I felt bad.
Yeah, see, exactly. I judoed you really nicely. Here's another genius register. Your opponent plays a Cry of the Carnarium. And
oh, baby.
Sacrifice a Dauntless Bodyguard in response. Cry resolves. You do not exile Dauntless Bodyguard, and then later you Johnny Dauntless Bodyguard back.
I'm going to say genius, or no, it's neither. That's just a very strange rules interaction, and I actually think that's acceptable. Like, missing that is acceptable.
This happened during the Pro Tour. I actually believe that it was an honest mistake. Because Cry of the Carnarium has one of the more ridiculous templates I've ever seen. It says, exile all creatures killed this way and all creatures killed earlier this turn. Like,
yeah, I mean, basically that's what
let me look up the exact wording. All creatures get -2 until end of turn. Exile all creature cards in graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So it goes both directions.
It's very strange, extremely strange.
And here, to give you an example of why I think that this was an honest mistake, because this happened to Marcio Carvalho, and there was a big Reddit thread, and a lot of people think that he intentionally cheated, or I guess just to say that cheated, because intentionally means cheating means intent. Yeah, and I actually talked with Marcio because I played against him in the top 8, and honestly, I think he made a mistake there, because this card is just templated different than every other card that's existed. And I didn't know about this until the week before at GP New Jersey, I guess 2 weeks before, where Reed Duke comes up and says, I just got a warning because my opponent played Cry of the Carnarium and I didn't exile a creature that had died in combat earlier that turn. And I'm like, wait, it does that? And then we all were like, what the hell? So, but basically put it this way. Reed got a warning for the exact same thing. He also didn't know how it worked. I think that in this case, it was not genius or grifter. I think it was just a mistake. So.
Agreed. I agree with you, Luis.
I mean, look, I'm not one to give people a free pass, but in this particular case, I do think that there was nothing nefarious going on. Just because this goes back to the percentages of them having a combat trick, right? In this particular case, the percentage is like, I find it extremely plausible that this was a mistake because this card is templated super weird. So I thought that was an interesting genius or grifter, and that's kind of where I land on that.